One of the problems with backups is typically we're making backups and we're storing them somewhere in the same location as our live systems, which is fine for routine backup and restore. Or if your disaster, your catastrophic failure or disaster is something isolated to a certain machine. But if you have a major disaster that takes out your entire data center, and I know it sounds extreme, something like a fire or a flood or something like that, those backups in the same data center aren't really going to do much good. So a lot of times we're looking for ways to do backups over larger geographic distances to isolate them from the live running systems. If you work in an organization that has multiple locations, this is a lot easier because you probably can do backups to other facilities and restore from other facilities. But in many cases, we can't do that for a variety of reasons. One of the options we have is to use Microsoft Azure. In this course, I don't really talk much about Azure, but pretty much all of the things that I've talked about in this course, you could use Azure for. You can move pretty much your entire infrastructure, your Windows infrastructure, into Microsoft Azure if you wanted to, and it would reduce a lot of the management that you would have to do at your site level. But that said, one of the services that Microsoft offers through Azure is backup, online backups, which is pretty closely integrated with Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2. So in order to do online backups natively with Azure, you do have to have at least Windows Server 2012. You won't be able to do system state, bare metal, or OS volume recoveries. You can only do file backups. So only file level backups are supported at this time. And you also can't do backups with BitLocker encrypted volumes. So if you're using BitLocker encrypted volumes, this will not work. So the volume you want to back up has to be online. It has to be NTFS. They don't yet support REFS, unless they've added that since I've recorded this video, which is entirely possible. They've been doing a lot with Microsoft Azure lately, so they might actually have that included now. So you have to download and install the Microsoft Azure Backup Agent on each server that you want to back up. The Windows Server Backup should be installed, so you still have to install the Windows Server Backup feature. You have to set up Microsoft Azure Backup account. It is a fee-based subscription service, so this is something that you would have to pay for outside of Microsoft Windows Server. And of course, you need a reliable internet connection. If you're in a location that doesn't have reliable internet, then this isn't really going to help that much. One of the things that I always tell clients is that if we can't back it up fast enough, we're never going to be ahead of the backups. We're always going to be behind if we don't have the bandwidth necessary. So this is only a good option if you have the adequate bandwidth to back up everything you need to back up each day within the time frame that you have to do the backup. If it takes 26 hours to back up 24 hours worth of data every day on your internet connection to Azure, then each day you're going to fall behind an hour until a couple weeks later you're behind almost a day. And it'll never get caught up. So it is important to understand what your bandwidth utilization is going to look like. So in order to do this, you're going to have to first go to azure.microsoft.com, and you'll have to set up an account. You can set up a free trial account for backup, which gives you 30 days of free usage. Of course, after that, you have to give them a valid credit card. So to create a backup vault, you'll log on to your Azure account, click on Storage, Data Services, Recovery Services, Backup Vault, and they're going to hit Quick Create to create that backup vault. If you already have a Microsoft Azure account, then you'd be able to do this in your existing Azure account as well. You don't have to create a special account just for doing backups. So if your organization already uses Microsoft Azure for something, then you can use the same account. And as I said before, there's a lot of things you can do in Azure. You can host your databases in Azure. You can host Active Directory in Azure, web services, all kinds of neat things. So you're going to enter a name for the backup vault and the region that's close to your location. Generally, you want to try to get a region that's close just for speed reasons, although some people like to use regions that are far away just to keep it geographically distant. Then you're going to click Create Vault. So after your vault's been created, all items in the left pane, and then click the New Backup Vault. So you're going to click everything on the left side, click New Backup Vault, and then from there you're going to download and install the Microsoft Azure Backup Agent. So you have to download the Vault credentials that are used when installing the agent. So that way it knows how to get to your Vault account in Microsoft Azure. So when you set up that little agent, you have to give it the credentials to know, where all these backup files are going to go in Azure. And then after the credentials are downloaded, you're going to click the link under Download Azure Backup Agent, And then after the agent is downloaded, you're going to double click the download file to install it, just like any other application or program. And this is what it's going to look like in Azure. So you'll follow the steps to install the agent, and then a link is created on your desktop to run the agent software. You can start it in the Windows Server Backup Console. So to use Microsoft Azure Backup, you have to schedule a backup first. So it's very similar to scheduling a backup in the standard backup utility with Microsoft. So it's really not all that different. In fact, it looks nearly identical. So you would tell it how often you want to schedule these backups, just like you do with the Microsoft tool that's native. And for throttling is if you want to make sure that your backups are not using all of the available bandwidth during regular work hours, right? So you can let it accelerate after hours, but during regular hours, maybe you're going to slow it down a little bit. So in this case, you can see this user has set during work hours from 9 to 5, it's going to use no more than 512 kilobits per second, and then it'll step it up to 1 gig after working hours. That way, it's not using all the available bandwidth either on the server or with the ISP in order to do backups. So that's how you do online backups with using Azure. Of course, there are other third-party tools and utilities to do online backups outside of Azure, but Azure is the option that's within the Microsoft ecosystem, and it works very well with Microsoft products. In the next slide deck, we're going to talk about site-level disaster recovery.